Reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verses 1 to 23. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same to the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Jesus reinstates Peter. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time. "Do you love me?" he said. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Because of this, the rumor spread among the believers that this disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you?" This is the word of the Lord.
Bit of a reading, isn't it? So what do we do on Easter 4? We look at more resurrection appearances. I hope you're with me on this. And this is the last one in John's Gospel, chapter 21. And it was, as we've heard just a few moments ago, the third time that Jesus had appeared post-resurrection to his disciples. But there's a bit of a difference this time. The previous chapter, where he started appearing to his disciples and to individuals as well, there's a different venue. No longer are we in the Jerusalem area, but we're up 60 miles north by the Sea of Tiberias, no doubt. And that's about 60 miles from Jerusalem. And of course, a group of these disciples, not all of them, we're told that it was Peter and half a dozen others. So he was there. We're not quite sure why they were up there. There's no explanation that is given to us for being 60 miles north at that time. So we can imagine the kind of conversations, I suppose, that are going on between these 7 disciples, can't we? And all of a sudden, Peter would say, "Oh, I fancy doing a bit of fishing," or something like that. And so he decides to tell the rest of the disciples there. And they said, "All right, then, we'll come with you. Can't think of anything better to do. We'll go and do it." Okay? So they stick up the notice on the board, "Gone fishing," and off they go. And what do? They spend the majority of the night catching absolutely nothing. Absolutely. So they were not exactly pleased, I suppose, with themselves or with the suggestion that had been made a little earlier. So these journeys, I suppose, that the disciples made were probably quite commonplace. We jump into our cars or a train or a bus, don't we? And we go 60 miles elsewhere. But no, they had Shanks's pony to thank. And it may have taken, we don't know quite how many days for them to get up there on the southwestern corner of the Sea of Galilee, as it's also known. But nevertheless, they were there and they were disappointed, I've no doubt. And so just as day was breaking, we find in verse 4, as we had it expertly read by Ashley, thank you, Jesus stood on the shore, it tells us. There he is. 100 yards away, approximately, we find out later. So difficult, perhaps, to identify somebody at that distance. But nevertheless, Jesus stood on the shore and they didn't recognize him at that point in time. And of course, we've heard of that story, haven't we? Mary Magdalene didn't recognize Jesus. She thought he was the gardener. Well, I suppose he was some sort of a gardener, but nevertheless, she didn't recognize him at first. And neither did these 7 disciples who had spent the night on a cold lake finding absolutely no fish. And he shouts out to them, Jesus does. He says, "Children," or friends, "have you got any fish?" "No," they said. They didn't say no. They said no. "Well, if you cast the net on the right side," now which side's the right side? Is that the starboard?
Yes.
Yes, at a rough guess, that's right. If you cast your net on the starboard side, I think you'll find some. You'll find some, yes. So, at his suggestion, they cast it, we're told. And now they were not able to haul the whole of this catch in. And of course, when you get results like this, somebody is going to get a good idea to say, it is the Lord. It's got to be him. We can't recognize him at this distance, but it must be him. It is the Lord, so says John. And at that moment, when Simon Peter heard it, what did he do? Well, of course, he was not a great thinker. Simon Peter wasn't. He was a great do-it-yourself. So he was stripped for fishing And he decided to get his outer garments on, and immediately, whoosh, couldn't wait for the boat to come to the shore. He had to be there. Typical Peter. We can imagine just how well he might have swam to the shore. But when he got there, perhaps he lost his voice, I don't know. But we're told that he put his outer garment on, and then the other disciples came in the boat. And he suggests, Jesus does, that they have a bit of breakfast. Can't be a bad idea. We've been out there all night, got freezing cold, I suppose. What a good idea. And of course, the level of conversation at this point, it's absolutely silent. They didn't need to speak. They knew it was Jesus. They knew that he had arrived. How he had arrived, they just did not understand, but they knew. And he invited them to a breakfast on the seashore. I've had a barbecue on a seashore before now, but I've never had a breakfast, but it must have been very, very pleasing and very, very comforting. And so the other disciples were fed as well. And so it was that they reached the end of the breakfast. What happens next? Well, something that possibly Simon Peter was quaking in his boots on, maybe. Maybe he was just waiting for that word from his Lord. And so the reinstatement of Simon Peter comes. You'll notice too, if you're looking at the text, he doesn't call him Peter. He'd earlier called him Peter when he'd confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, the God, the Christ of the living God. A little earlier during his ministry, he said, "Your name shall be Peter," at that point. But why he didn't call him that, I think we can gain a little understanding. Yes, he might be becoming the rock upon which Jesus was going to rely on for the early gospel preaching, but he wasn't quite there, was he, at that point in time? So he says, "Simon," we know the story so well. We learnt it in Sunday school, didn't we, when we were tiny. "Simon, do you love me more than these?" he says, first of all. Who he was or what he was pointing to, we are not told. When he said, "Do you love me more than these?" perhaps it wasn't that important who he was referring to. It might have been pointing to the fish. He may have been pointing to the other disciples as he looked at Simon. But nevertheless, the important distinction here is this, that there are several words in the Greek that have been translated all into the same word that we know as love. The actual word that Jesus used was, "Do you love me with a supreme love that outstands all other kinds of love?" The top of the ladder in terms of love, sacrificial love. And that's the translation that we see here. "Do you love me with a supreme love?" And all Simon could answer was, "I love you with the downgraded level of love. The filio, the brotherly kindness kind of love. Yes, that's the level that I can reach at this moment in time." So he's not there yet. But nevertheless, Jesus replies, and he says, "Feed my lambs." So he is slowly reinstating him to his not his former position, but the position that he's going to hold for his preaching life. Simon, second time, do you agape me? Do you love me with a supreme love? Yes, I phileo you again, he says the second time. So he's still not got to that point where his love matches the love of his Lord at this point in time. But nevertheless, he says, will you tend my sheep this time? Look after them. So he's still asking him to be involved in what he's planning for the future. The third and final time, of course, he asks him, our Lord changes his tune here. Instead of using the Greek word agape, he comes in with phileo. Do you phileo me? He says. And at this point, we are told that Simon is quite upset. He's hurt, as we heard in the translation that Ashley read. He was hurt. And he has to respond, you know everything, Lord. You know that I phileo you. I love you with all that I'm capable of at this moment in time. And what was the Lord's reply? Follow me, he says. Follow me. And then he went on to explain that in his calling, the Lord knows what's going to happen to Peter. The Lord knows what's going to happen to him. And so that verse which tells us that when you're young, you're going to do whatever you want to do and nobody's going to trouble you. But when you get older, someone else is going to make the decisions for you and take you to where you don't want to go. And of course, we heard the explanation of that particular verse. And that was the Lord reassuring him or informing him prophetically exactly how he was going to serve him. He was going to serve him, and at a given point in time, he was going to be crucified. He would die a death that is not of his choosing, but of someone else's choosing. And that was it Jesus' final word to him? Well, not really, because there's a third section on this passage, and we mustn't forget this, because this is the bit where we can apply everything to ourselves. And he said, Peter turned in verse 20, we are told, and he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, which is John, the gospel writer. And he said to him, after he'd had this explanation from the Lord that he was going to die a violent death probably, if it is my will that he should not die, then just follow me anyway. That was what he told him earlier. And he says, but Peter wants to get this qualified. And he says, Lord, what about this man? And he replies, well, if it is my will that he remain, he's not stating this, if it is my will that he remain until I come, then follow me yourself. Just follow me. Don't worry about anybody else around you. That was typical Peter. He'd always got something that he wanted to say at a given point in time. But on this occasion, the Lord has to rebuke him kindly, but nevertheless, he has to tell him off. Concentrate on following me yourself. And therein lies, I believe, the real lesson in this storyline. Because each of us has a calling. You see, Peter's calling was that of evangelist. And just a few weeks later, we find him standing up back in Jerusalem, preaching the very first gospel sermon and experiencing such amazing results. 3,000 people turning to the Lord as a result of his message. And we find that this ministry went on with Peter. The second time that he spoke, it was 5,000 people that came to the Lord. So here was a calling that Peter was fulfilling. He was the great evangelist. And if we go back to when they were called, and if you turn to the beginning of Mark's Gospel, I'm just going on memory now, when the disciples were called, Simon and Andrew were casting a net into the sea, weren't they? And that was to be, I believe, the calling for Peter, to cast a net and to be the evangelist of the early church. But when John and his brother James were being called, same chapter, the beginning of Mark, what were they doing? They weren't casting a net into the sea. They were mending their nets. And I believe that that was an indication that John, who lived, we believe, a much longer life and who wasn't executed in the same way that the other disciples or apostles were, I believe that this was the lesson that John was to learn, that he was spared to live to a grand old age. And as the gospel was being written and was now in the hands of the people, this gospel wasn't written until the last decade of the first century. So we know that he was spared to carry out the ministry that he was called to do. And I believe that this is the lesson for each one of us today, that if we pay particular attention to the Lord, and if we listen and we follow him, follow me, he says, and I will take you to where your ministry will take you. Maybe you know your ministry. Maybe you know your calling. If you don't, then let me invite you to come before the Lord before we finish this service today. Follow me. Find out what the Lord wants to do with your life. Don't rebel. Don't be fearful. Don't procrastinate. We do all of these things in other matters. But the Lord wants us to openly and honestly and courageously follow him wherever he wants to lead us, because that's where our ministry lies. Whatever our age, whatever we're doing, whether we're 8, 18, 28, or coming up 80, whatever your age, follow me, for I have a plan for your life, and you will realize then exactly how gracious I've been in your life to date. Amen.